Good evening, dear guests and friends of the Goethe Institute. Or shall I say good day or good morning, given that we might have visitors from different time zones. I'm Katharina von Ruckteschell, the director of the Goethe Institute London, and welcome you all to our annual lecture. Before I start, I also want to introduce you to Ali Gordon, here beside me, who's providing BSL interpretation for any sign language users in the audience. Well, due to the corona pandemic, we meet tonight in this online mode, which is actually very sad, as I would have loved to have our amazing lecturer today here in our beautiful Goethe Institute London. In any case, I'm really happy to welcome Sharon Dodua Otoo as our first speaker of the Goethe Annual Lecture. That follows the tradition of our annual Brady Lecture, many of you might know. I'm very pleased that so many of you logged in to this very special event tonight. For several years, we had Sharon on our wish list for our annual lecture, and we are very happy that she accepted our invitation in 2020. This is especially the case as two of our wider institute focus themes are questions around colonial past and also the future of Europe, both having to deal with the rising of populism and racism. Sharon Dodua Otoo is a writer and activist. She was brought up and educated in London by her Ghanaian parents and moved to Berlin in 2006. She is an author of prose, an activist in the initiatives Schwarze Menschen in Deutschland, which is translated as Black People in Germany, and Phoenix. She is an editor of the English language book series Witnessed and mother of 4 sons. Maybe I should have mentioned that as first. She is the winner of one of the most important literature awards, the Ingeborg Bachmann Prize 2016. And I want to especially mention that her new book, which will be published next year by S. Fischer, will be her first novel and is written in German. I hope we will be able to invite her to London again in person for the launch of the English translation then. Tonight in her talk, Some Kind of Tomorrow, Sharon will honor the visions of Black feminist authors and explore the structures that have marginalized and excluded them. But before I hand over to her, I must briefly introduce some digital housekeeping. The session will be recorded. For this evening's event, you will not have access to your camera or mic. But we do encourage you, however, to use the Q&A function to pose your questions after the lecture. Sharon's lecture of around 35 minutes will be followed by a Q&A session led by Marcel Mateki-Akita, herself an author and literature festival producer based here in the UK. We are very happy to have her here with us tonight. Welcome to you, Marcel, as well. If you are new to the Zoom platform and experiencing difficulties with your sound or vision, please make yourself known to the Q&A through the Q&A function, and my colleague Ibrahim will do his best to find a fix. But now I hand over to Sharon Dodua Otoo in Berlin to give her lecture Some Kind of Tomorrow, honoring the visions of Black feminist creative authors. Dear Sharon, thank you again for accepting our invitation. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much for the warm introduction. I shall begin. Good evening, dear audience. It is a very great honor for me to be giving the Goethe Annual Lecture this year. I would have liked to thank Dr. Katharina von Ruckteschell-Katter and her team, live and in person, for their very warm welcome, their excellent hospitality, and the very delicious dinner. I was particularly looking forward to the dinner, but it was not meant to be. 2020 has been a bizarre year, and with all the absolute disasters that have occurred worldwide, I'm privileged indeed if my biggest concern is that I am missing out on the after-speech spread. So instead of complaining, I would like to sincerely thank everyone at Goethe Institute London for this generous invitation and unique opportunity to share my thoughts with you all about a subject that I'm absolutely passionate about. However, before I begin with my talk, I'd like to invite you all to participate in a little thought experiment, and it may sound strange, but please bear with me. I would like you all to consider the size of your outer ears. Maybe you would like to feel them, or perhaps it's enough to just look at your reflection in a mirror or selfie. Ears typically come in a range of shapes, colors, and dimensions. For the purposes of this thought experiment, I'd like you to focus only on their size. Are they small, medium, or large? And do you think your self-assessment would match with how other people would rate them? Close family members, work colleagues, fellow students, complete strangers? And now imagine how unjust it would be if your life chances were limited by the apparent size of your ears. I say apparent deliberately because in this scenario, people are not actually walking around with rulers or measuring tape. They are making snap judgments in passing or only after the briefest of first impressions. Judgments and impressions which quickly become irrevocable. Imagine if a new scientific theory emerged which linked ear size to intellectual prowess or leadership skills or exceptional beauty. Imagine if popular culture was dominated by images of people with big ears. Imagine you grew up with the belief that the bigger your ears were, the more sexually attractive you would be. So, what if you had small ears, but you were convinced that you too could be a chancellor or prime minister? You too could deliver an Academy Award-winning performance. You too could be the CEO of a DAX company. Imagine if you took to growing your hair or covering your head in a specific way so that you could get away with acting as if your ears were larger than they really are. But even as you moved in the circles of those with big ears, you still lived with the trauma of past humiliation, the shame of hiding, and the anxiety of being found out. Imagine that all of this had arisen as a direct consequence of a single dubious scientific theory which originated hundreds of years ago and has long since been disproved, but was still widely believed to this day. Thankfully, we know better. The size of our ears is rarely of any great significance unless they are really extraordinarily large or the outer part does not exist at all. Similarly, the tone of one's skin is not an adequate indicator of ability, talent, or potential. Neither is it a measure of the likelihood to either commit a crime or to be awarded a Nobel Prize. Of course it isn't. And yet here we are. Aside from a worldwide pandemic, which has meant I cannot fly to London to enjoy a very delicious dinner courtesy of the Goethe Institute, 2020 has also given us, for a brief moment in time, a worldwide spotlight on the reality of racism in predominantly white countries. The reason I began my talk with this thought experiment is because for the next 30 minutes or so, I will be focusing on Black writers, or more specifically, Black feminist creative writers. And it is therefore vital that I clarify from the outset what I'm talking about when I use the word Black in this context. For even with all the protesting and the Twitter hashtags and the Black squares on Instagram, there is still a widespread assumption that the political identity Black refers to a physical trait, an apparent shade of the skin. I deliberately say apparent because typically people are not walking around with color charts in order to objectively measure skin tone. They are making snap judgments in passing or only after the briefest of first impressions. Judgments and impressions which quickly become irrevocable. However, a Black person can be as dark-skinned as Alec Weck or Lupita Nyong'o, or as light-skinned as Meghan Markle or Jesse Williams. When I refer to a person as Black, I'm not referring to their skin tone. Indeed, I am as unlikely to base my own political identity on my skin tone as I am on my eye color, nose width, or ear size. any discrimination I experience does not occur because of my physical characteristics. Discrimination occurs due to an accumulation of assumptions about what those characteristics allegedly say about me. A banal example. On my way home from a job interview, so I was really well dressed, I was approached by a white woman. I didn't understand straight away what she was asking of me, as she was not using whole sentences. She was mostly only using pronouns, infinitives, and exclamation marks. It was clear she volunteered for a local food bank known as the Berliner Tafel, and I assumed she was collecting donations for it. It took some time for me to realize that she was actually trying to explain to me how I could access the free groceries there myself. She had assumed I would not be able to speak fluent German, and that I was quite obviously in need, based only on her very limited knowledge of people who look like me. My resistance to discrimination is therefore not based on trying to change any of my own physical characteristics. Instead, my focus is on using literature to change or eliminate the assumptions. So what do I mean when I use the word black to describe people? I identify as black, and I write this with a capital B. In this way, I am signifying that I'm engaging with the assumptions. I'm educating myself about them. I'm identifying with other members of the African diaspora who have resisted against racist oppression, who have developed strategies for survival, and who, under the most adverse circumstances, have succeeded in passing on our myriad cultures, languages, and histories down through generations. I identify as Black, and I also identify as a feminist. In doing so, I draw on the definition of Bell Hooks, an African-American professor, activist, and author who wrote an essay published in 1984, which seeks to answer the question, what is feminism? At the time of writing, Bell Hooks was frustrated with the lack of clarity concerning its definition. In response to her contemporaries, who proclaimed the need to make women the social equals of men, Bell Hooks asked, which men do women want to be equal to? In capitalist, predominantly white societies, it is clear that some men are more privileged than others. So why would any woman seek to participate in systems which perpetuate this? And I would add that a feminism which solely focuses on making women the social equals of men is inadequate also from a queer perspective. Where does this focus on women on one side and men on the other side leave gender non-conforming people? The essay that Bell Hooks wrote is called Feminism, a Movement to End Sexist Oppression, and it's available online. Her definition is in the title. Feminism, she claims, and I agree with her, must target sexist oppression, but needs to consider how this links with race and class-based oppression also. And if we think about what that might mean, then we quickly realize that sexist oppression negatively impacts everybody. Women, trans men, non-binary people, and actually even cis men. Cis men here means men who were assigned male at birth and still live comfortably with that gender designation. Patriarchy affects them too, in different ways, of course. This is not going to be a talk about those poor men. But we can see that the stereotypes of having to be strong, being discouraged from showing vulnerability, statements like boys don't cry, all of these are forms of toxic masculinity, which is certainly damaging to men also. Therefore, a focus on combating sexist oppression is a good baseline for thinking about how we can make a society more just for all its members. The African-American theorist, writer, and activist Audre Lorde once famously spoke about the need to look at many different forms of oppression at the same time. She said, and I quote, "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. Black women experience sexism. However, due to racism, Black women typically earn less than their white women, and so are also more likely to experience class discrimination. Black women usually also perform most of the caring responsibilities, either unpaid within the home or poorly paid outside of the home, or both. Indeed, Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, an African American legal expert and activist, coined the term intersectionality to provide a theoretical framework to analyze Black female experiences of oppression. Simply put, if you imagine racism as a road that runs in one direction and sexism as a road that runs directly across it, Black women stand at the intersection of both. This means, for example, workplace policies designed to improve race equality typically end up benefiting Black men most, and political policies designed to reduce sexism typically end up benefiting white women most. Black feminist theory production allows us to focus on these intersections. But why should we do this? My answer is because we cannot afford not to. On the other side of the Atlantic, we are witnessing the catastrophic consequences of a government that ignored the grave social inequalities in the United States, indeed exacerbated them over the last 4 years. Across Europe, right-leaning populism continues to rise, and at the borders of Europe, hundreds of people drown while seeking refuge here. Meanwhile, the climate crisis hovers like the sword of Damocles over us all. And I have not even mentioned COVID-19. We desperately need a system change. And it is my firm belief that if the focus is placed on ensuring that the situation is improved for those of us who are suffering most, ultimately society will be more humane for us all. So by way of example, in a heteronormative society, queer people will be suffering the most. In a racist society, it will be Black people and people of color. And in a sexist society, it will be women and non-binary people. The Black Lives Matter movement in the US was founded by 3 Black queer women in 2013. Black women have been the backbone of many anti-racist movements and race equality initiatives in the UK. For example, Claudia Jones, who founded the Notting Hill Carnival in 1966. And the most recent wave of the Black German movement grew largely through the tireless work of Black lesbians and Black women in the mid-1980s. In Black communities, creative writing plays a major role in the pursuit of social change and social justice. Dominant perspectives in academia, on history, and in media representation have tended to downplay the achievements and contributions of people in the African diaspora. European histories of Africa typically begin with colonialism. School children do not learn much more about Africa than the fact that enslaved people were violently removed from their homes, kidnapped, transported overseas, and forced to labor on plantations under horrendous conditions. It is known that many historical sources which attest to life in pre-colonial Africa have been lost or destroyed, while hundreds of thousands of cultural artifacts, the exact number will never be known, have been removed from their countries of origin and taken to Europe. In this context, cultural production and creative writing provide a crucial means with which Black communities can attempt to reclaim their stories. It is, as the great Nigerian author, novelist, and poet Chinua Achebe wrote in his first novel, Things Fall Apart, until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. The title of my talk is taken from Beloved, a novel by the Nobel Prize winning African American writer Toni Morrison. It's a devastating novel, beautiful and haunting. The story of Sethe, a mother who murders her own little daughter to save her from a life of enslavement, was published in 1987. It forced US American readers to reckon with a trauma that is not accounted for in history books. In one of the final scenes of the book, Paul D., also a formerly enslaved person, speaks lovingly to Sethe. Sethe, he says, me and you, we got more yesterday than anybody. We need some kind of tomorrow. He leans over and takes her hand. With the other, he touches her face. You, your best thing, Sethe, you are. His holding fingers are holding hers. And then Sethe responds, me. For a person who had legally belonged to someone else for most of her life, who had been abused and brutalized, for this person to not only be told that she belonged to herself now, but that she was her own best thing, is one of the most powerful moments in the novel. The concept of Black people having a future is also completely radical, and it goes to the heart of Black imagination. Toni Morrison dared to write stories which did not center white people and the white experience. Many criticized her for this and asked, when was she going to write about the truly important matters, like white people? Her response was always the same, that this was not her focus. She wanted to write for Black people in the same way that Leo Tolstoy wrote for Russians, or in the same way that the fictional universe of James Joyce centered around Dublin. As a relatively new writer, I've taken a lot of encouragement from Toni Morrison's stance. I know that some have considered it to be provocative, and even from the perspective of a Black writer, it could seem to be counterintuitive. Why should I limit myself to Black readers only? Wouldn't I want as many people as possible to be reading my work? Surely the bigger the audience, the better. Moreover, her statement obviously cannot be reversed. If a white author were to openly announce that they were only writing for white people, that would be problematic, to say the least. However, I understand that Toni Morrison was actually saying that the cultural production in the United States during her lifetime had been dominated by the white imagination. White male writers filled the essential reading lists. They were the ones who were winning most of the literature prizes. They were the ones who were being reviewed. They were being taught in English literature classes at school and in university. And because of this, there is a dearth of knowledge, Black history and Black culture, also amongst Black people. Toni Morrison wanted to fill that gap. She aimed to write for those people who thus far had not been seen as a target audience. Many works of fiction that were being published in the US at that time, even by Black people, were targeted at a white audience. Toni Morrison mentions the book Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison as one such book. Invisible to whom, she asks. Ellison had written as a Black person, but his novel was still explaining something to a white reader, and this frustrated her. Toni Morrison herself was influenced by Chinua Achebe, the Nigerian writer I quoted earlier, who specifically focuses the African experience in his fictional writing. Before things fall apart, the best known novels that had been published about Africa had been written from a white perspective, focusing on the savagery of this dark continent. Achebe succeeded in presenting the melodies of his Igbo language in a way that was accessible for a global Anglophone audience, allowing many of us in the diaspora to enter an unfamiliar world, pre-colonial West Africa, and feel right at home there. I also want to focus on Black people with my creative writing, which is not to say that non-Black people cannot read my literature, but it is to say that when non-Black people read my work, they are being offered a chance to access an exchange that I am having with Black people. And I think this is a valuable way to share rare knowledge and new perspectives. So at this point, I'd like to refresh everyone's memories about the thought experiment at the beginning of the talk. Black literature is not simply literature written by people who have darker skin. Black literature does not stand in opposition to white literature. It would be greatly diminishing to read Beloved as an anti-white text. Toni Morrison's tremendous achievement is to imagine Black people as an essential part of US American humanity. In Beloved, she succeeds in articulating and transforming collective pain and handing it back to Africans in their diaspora as art. Another writer I am heavily influenced by is the Black German activist, academic, and poet, Maya Ayim. In the early 1980s, the aforementioned Audre Lorde visited Berlin and engaged in a conversation with Maya Yim and other Black German women. They spoke about their specific experiences of being Black in predominantly white countries. In Germany at the time, it was difficult to find the vocabulary to explain and describe their experiences. There was not even really a word they could proudly use to describe their own political identity. The words which had been used before had either been borrowed from the animal kingdom or derived from dubious race theorists writing about the inferiority of Africans. At the time, Black Germans coined their own identity, Afrodeutsch. It was inspired by the US term Afro-American. In 1984, so in the same year that Bell Hooks published the essay I mentioned earlier, the seminal work Farbe bekennen was published, in English translation, Showing Our Colors. This anthology, which is co-edited by Maya Yim, contains academic texts, poetry, and autobiographical stories, and it marked a milestone in Black German history. There had been Black Germans in Germany up until that point. Indeed, Black people have existed in Germany for over 300 years. In the dominant German discourse, it is mostly assumed that the first Black Germans were children of US American soldiers after World War II. Or some will have heard of the so-called Rhineland children who were fathered by French army personnel stationed in the Rhineland during the French occupation after World War I. But that would be about it. With the publication of Farbe bekennen, there was now a collection of texts which provided evidence of Black German history reaching back into the 18th century. The inaugural meetings of the more recent Black German movement also took place in the mid-80s, at about the same time as the publication of Farbe bekennen. The initiative Black People in Germany, ESD, Initiative Schwarze Menschen in Deutschland, and ADEFRA, a Black queer feminist organization, were both founded at this time. Maya Yim also used poetry and spoken word, often in a humorous way, to depict aspects of the Black German experience. For example, in her poem Afrodeutsch 1, she mocks those white Germans who have been making her life hell for so many years. I'll read a little in the German original and then my own translation. Sie sind Afrodeutsch? Ah, ich verstehe. Afrikanisch und Deutsch. Ist ja eine interessante Mischung. Wollen Sie denn mal zurück? Wie, Sie waren noch nie in der Heimat vom Papa. Ist ja traurig. Also wenn Sie mich fragen, so eine Herkünften, das prägt eben doch ganz schön. Ich zum Beispiel, ich bin aus Westfalen und ich finde, da gehöre ich auch hin. And in translation, you're Afrodeutsch? Ah, I see. African and German. What an interesting mixture. So, do you want to go back sometimes? What do you mean you've never been to your father's homeland? How sad. Well, if you ask me, your heritage, it really leaves a mark on you. Me, for example, I come from Westphalia, and I think that's exactly where I belong. Maya Yim had a particularly wonderful way of performing her poetry. It was always a highlight at meetings of Black Germans, providing a means of channeling collective emotions, laughing together, crying together, while at the same time holding up a mirror to the dominant society. If, as I claim, Black feminist creative writers have such a key role to play in progressive movements, as well as the pursuit of justice more broadly, why are they not more well known in their respective societies? I participated in a networking event in the spring of 2015, convened by Philipp Kabe-Köpsel in Berlin. It was called the Ingeborg Schwarze Kulturschaffende in Deutschland. Ingeborg is a South African term which means important conference or matter. Schwarze Kulturschaffende means Black cultural workers. We met for 2 days. The first day was closed and the second day was open to the public. And we had discussions about Black cultural production in Germany, what we were doing, what we wished to do, what the obstacles to our work were. It became very clear that there were some serious structural issues. The creative writers at the INDEBA reported that very few people working in German language publishing houses were Black. Literature critics, agents, Literaturhäuser, so institutions which are charged with the promotion of literature, all of these tended to be exclusively or predominantly white spaces, and there was a lack of understanding of Black perspectives in the publishing industry. And Black people were not considered as a relative target group in terms of readership. Black writers reported that they were often asked to downplay the Blackness of their characters by introducing a white best friend into the story or making descriptions of physical attributes more racially ambiguous. Some cover designs made Black characters appear white. And some writers reported being asked to consider using pen names so that they would not sound so foreign. Since the summer of this year, there has been renewed awareness concerning the pervasiveness of structural racist discrimination. In the UK, the Black Writers Guild was established in June and has pushed for the implementation of policies to achieve adequate representation of Black people in the literature industry. Many of the issues in the UK are the same as those which were highlighted in the INDEBA in 2015. The Black British academic, professor, editor, and award-winning author Bernardine Evaristo has been involved in the Black Writers Guild and is in any case a long-standing advocate for the inclusion of Black writers and writers of colour. Two of her projects are the Brunel International African Poetry Prize, which was founded in 2012, and Black Britain Writing Back, a new book series with Hamish Hamilton, which will bring back into print classics of Black British literature. Bernardine Evaristo's latest novel, Girl, Woman, Other, focuses on the experiences of a range of different, mostly Black women and one non-binary person in Britain. Not only does Bernardine Evaristo bring their perspectives to life with her vivid, innovative, and eclectic writing style, she also talks candidly in her speeches and interviews about her desire to platform the stories of those who are underrepresented or not represented at all in British literature. I had the great pleasure of sitting next to her on a panel when she came to Germany in 2017, and it was a wonderful experience. She challenged me and she challenged the other panel participants, not only to think about what we were doing with our creative writing, but also to consider its impact in greater society beyond the relatively insular literature world. She's not only a brilliant writer, but she's also a fearless and outspoken mentor. As I prepared my talk, it occurred to me that I would have to add one more layer to the definition of Black feminism, as the last writer I will mention, Buchi Emecheta, did not identify as a feminist in her lifetime. As far as I'm aware, neither did Toni Morrison. However, when I think about who has influenced me as a creative writer, I end up thinking about the Haltung of my literary idols. I don't find the word Haltung so easy to translate into English. Earlier in my talk, I used the word stance, which comes close, but I feel Haltung has a broader meaning which encompasses an individual's inner values and how these shape one's thoughts and actions on a whole range of issues. It's their Haltung that I'm referring to when I describe Toni Morrison, Maya Yim, Bernardine Evaristo, and Buchi Emecheta as Black feminists. The Nigerian author, academic, and fierce advocate for women's rights, Buchi Emecheta, was a prolific writer. Like Toni Morrison, Buchi Emecheta was a single mother in full-time employment who wrote her novels early in the morning before her work. Her books are brutally honest and draw heavily on her own life experiences, depicting poverty in London and domestic violence, all from the perspective of a Black woman. When asked in an interview how she managed to write with the children, she simply answered, "I had to write because of them." As a single parent myself, this resonates deeply with me. The sentence, "honoring the visions of Black feminist creative authors," in the title of my talk, can be understood in two ways, and I'm happy to invoke both meanings. This evening, I've wanted to honor my literary ancestors and mentors. Maya Yim, Toni Morrison, and Buchi Emecheta would have deserved far more recognition than they have received in their lifetimes. And I'm looking forward to the day Bernardine Evaristo wins the Booker Prize for a second time and will not share the accolade with anyone else. Or the Nobel Prize in Literature. The Nobel is also good. Moreover, I intend to honor their cultural contracts. Each of them has sought to transform the societies which they have lived and worked in using creative writing as their tool. Greatly influenced by them, I, in turn, would like to encourage other Black writers through my editorship of the English language book series Witnessed. I also write diverse Black female figures in my creative writing. My next publication, Ada's Raum, or Ada's Room, will be my debut novel, and I've written it in German. The main character, Ada, or Ada, or Ada, lives through 4 time periods: pre-colonial West Africa in 1459, 19th century England, here she's Ada Lovelace, and then Nazi Germany in 1945, and finally Berlin 2019. Each time she is confronted with traumatic memories and needs to find a way to deal with them. As a writer, I feel powerless to single-handedly end structural racism. But like Toni Morrison, Maya Yim, Buchi Emecheta, and Bernardine Evaristo, I can bear witness. And I can write about the myriad ways in which racism affects us all. I can use my literature in the service of Black lives so that we can have some kind of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you. I'm sure those who are watching are applauding in their own spaces. And thank you so much, Ali, too, for a wonderful interpretation of Sharon's lecture. So good evening, everyone. My name is Marcel. I'll be moderating the Q&A section of this lecture. And just so you're all aware, I'll be asking Sharon a couple of questions. And then after that, we will open it up to your questions. If you have a question, please do input this in the Q&A box, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And if you don't have a question, but you've seen someone has written a question that you're like, oh, I want that answered, please click the thumbs up button and it will upvote that question so we're able to see that and have Sharon answer it. Okay, great. So Sharon, thank you. How are you feeling?
I'm good. I'm a little thirsty.
I can imagine. Yes, yeah. Talking 30 minutes straight. It was brilliant, brilliant. Thank you so much for your really powerful lecture. So the first thing that came to me was it feels like you're taking us on a deliberate journey with this lecture. You start from the place of the personal when you ask us to do the thought experiment with the ears. You then move on to invite us to think about the concept and the realities of Blackness, to then exploring the contribution and honoring Black feminist creative writing. And I liked when you were speaking about Beloved, you said how Toni Morrison basically packaged up the trauma and turned it into art for Black communities, specifically African-American communities. And the thing about your exercise, about taking us through the thought experiment to looking at these concepts and these realities, is that creative writing is about bridging empathy. It's about bridging audiences, right? It's about bridging different communities through empathy. And art in itself is healing. So it's a collective healing practice through what Toni Morrison was doing. So I just wondered, when you were asked to do this annual lecture, why did this topic come to mind, and why for the Goethe Institute? Why this journey, essentially?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for taking over the moderation. It's a great pleasure to meet you. It's an interesting question. Partly when I was approached and asked to give this lecture, in the initial conversations that we had, it was clear that I was being approached because of my work, my background, my activism, and the way that I use creative writing to try to transport these ideas. So there was a specific request to talk about this subject. And then I thought very carefully about who's likely to be watching this evening. And I wanted to make sure that I did not miss people. You know, I can't assume either that people are completely fit in the subject, or I don't want to also assume that everybody has never heard of anything to do with what I'm talking about before. So I had to find a way to pitch it. So this is why I tried with the personal, I tried to come up with a thought experiment that could maybe catch everybody. I also felt that, especially during the summer when Black Lives Matter became so prominent again in the dominant media, that there were many people who focused on skin color, and people talk about, for example, there's a common phrase when you say, I was discriminated against because I'm Black, or because my skin is dark, or something like that. And I always feel like I'd like to be one of the people who achieves it to change that we don't talk about an individual being discriminated against because something they are, but they're being discriminated against because the other person who's doing that is racist, right? Or is sexist. And so I tried to think about a way that I could pick up on this idea of what it means to be Black, and not to focus on the skin color, on this physical attribute, but to focus on the cultural heritage. This is what I wanted to do. And I think I agree with you, creative writing and art in general is not trying to do an exact translation of what's happening in the real world. It takes a word and then it tries to fill it with a meaning and tries to connect with people's imaginations. And there's a kind of a gap where people can bring their own associations to it. And that's where the magic happens. And that's what I wanted to try to achieve in this talk. So a talk is a very formal situation. There's a certain, process that probably has to be adhered to, but I wanted to also put in a bit of creativity.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. And there was also something you said that I found quite profound, and there's definitely a shift. We're feeling it more and more so, which is the idea, and not just the idea, but the reality of cultural production and creative writing being a vehicle for Black communities reclaiming their stories. But I found it interesting that the tools, as maybe Audre Lorde would call it, the tools or the institutions we're looking at to help us reclaim these stories are through academia and publishing. And when we think about their deep-rooted history in colonialism, and even setting up, pseudo science, racist kind of literature, I'm just curious about what your thoughts are about us using those vehicles of academia and publishing to reclaim our stories. What does that mean for Black writers, Black academics, and also in the UK particularly? We saw during the peak of the Black Lives Matter movement during summer that there were so many statements that were coming out. And I think there is a fear of this kind of tokenistic gesture. And what does it really take to make meaningful and impactful change within these institutions that haven't even confronted their colonial pasts and heritage? So I wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah. Yes, I do speak about academia a lot, and I guess in this talk I focus very heavily on the publishing industry. The reason I've done that is simply, it's a very pragmatic situation. I have access to the publishing industry. I now have a certain privilege, let's say, a certain scope, and I'm using my tools to try to make change where I happen to be, where my sphere of influence is. I wouldn't though say that that's by no means the only place that we should be trying to affect change. That's not the most important area. I believe that, yeah, I talk about racism often as a massive project, imagine that there's a massive stone, like, I don't know, boulder, something really huge, maybe a mountain, and then everybody has a toothbrush and they're trying to get rid of this stone, right, with their toothbrushes. And it does make it, you know, you are scraping off some of the dust. It will make a difference, but it's so minute. And if everybody's working on it from their perspectives, from their position of expertise, then we will eventually take this boulder down. But it's a massive, massive undertaking. I'm not under no illusions of that. So I think because I'm a writer, I find words important, and I find the documentation, like how empowering it is for me to go to a library or to go to a bookstore or to go to an antique, and I don't know what they're called in English, but an antique bookstore, whatever they're called, Antiquariat for the German speakers, to find books that maybe they had a really minimal print run, maybe there were only ever 100 copies made, but these books were documenting Black experiences and stories. That's really important, because that's like almost the only thing we have. We also have oral history, of course. Black histories is often being handed down through stories, through songs, through symbols. And these are all ways of trying to hold on to who we are, and to pass them on to future generations. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does.
Yeah.
No, thank you so much. We have about 10 minutes to answer a few questions that have come through. We've got quite a bit, which is exciting. So people are definitely engaging.
Sure.
And yeah, for everyone who is watching, yeah, please remember to just thumbs up the questions you would really like to see answered. So, Sharon, I'm glad you've got your sip of water there. So Sharon, the first thing is applause. That's from Astrid. And we've had like 35. Oh, you know the person. Oh,
I have to quickly say there's 2 people who are watching this evening, and I'm so excited. I mean, I'm excited about all the people who are watching, of course, and I'm excited about all the people who've written to me to tell me they're watching. And then there's 2 people especially who have followed me on my whole German. They're 2 university lecturers of mine, Astrid and Moira, and I just want to send them a little heart. So proud.
Oh, that's so lovely.
Yeah.
That is so lovely. So yeah, so that's an applause from Astrid, and 41 people have liked that. So it came straight to the top. Okay, so 48, 49. Oh wow, people are really liking it. So everyone is pleased. Okay, cool. So the first question is from Zoya Anwer. And the question is there a way to address microaggressions rooted in racism against brown people or Black, Indigenous people of color, BIPOC, in the academia where the post-colonial professors feel attacked when they are politely told that they are being racist? Do you need me to repeat that, or okay?
The first part, what was the first part again? Is there
a way to address microaggressions?
Okay, this is a difficult question to answer. I'm gonna not even pretend that I have the answer. It depends if you're the only Black or brown person in the room. It depends kind of what do you feel up for a challenge, or would you rather just keep your head down and do your work? Is this a professor who's going to be in your academic career for a long time, or is it a passing, one course and then he's gone? I would say it's very important to start with yourself. This, again, the project of racism is a massive one. In any encounter that you have with an individual who says or does something racist, or where you encounter racist structures, it's it would be ideal, in an ideal world, you would engage with that racist structure or person, tell them, they would say, oh, didn't know that, thank you very much, and then it would be changed. But as we can see, here we are, it doesn't go that easily. So what I would advise any person who experiences racism to do is to first and foremost check on their own emotional strength. Is this a battle that they're willing to pick up now? Or is it something that they want to pick up at a later date? Do they want to go along with a couple of friends? I've often decided to deliberately avoid situations and send in a white best friend to do the talking. It's about strategies. It's about recognizing that racism is really pervasive. It knows how to look after itself. It's going to be around for a long time. So a friend of mine talks about this as being a marathon and not a sprint, which means we know we've got to keep keep in training and keep our stamina and just keep look after ourselves. The best, I would say, weapon against racism is to have strong, emotionally strong, secure Black people.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely second that. I think it's really important to definitely look after yourself through that process, because the emotional labor that goes into that it's it's a lot. Okay, so the next question is from LFB Com 3. So the question is, how has your experience in living in Berlin been in relation to racism? Do you feel that Germany has the same racism as the UK has? I think this is an interesting question.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I have been asked that question before. It's not the same. It's definitely not the same because it's just different cultural histories. There are different sort of triggers. A different structure in terms of community populations, where Black people come from and how they relate to each other. I was born and raised in London. That's also a different setup to the rest of the UK. But I would say what they have in common, what the common theme is that whiteness is the dominant, imagination, the dominant structure. And as a Black person, you sort of have to figure out your way within that. There are different strategies to behaving in a predominantly white country. If you're a Black person, you can try to assimilate, or you can resist, or any of the, you can change your mind a couple of times a day. And that is a negotiation that happens whether I'm in the UK or in Germany. I would say, I can only really compare the cities. I can only really compare London and Berlin, to be honest, because I believe that Berlin is also very unique in Germany. Berlin is a place that has a relatively diverse population, relatively, in comparison to London, not particularly, but in comparison to the rest of Germany, relatively diverse. There's a lot of community activity going on in Berlin, which meant that I was very involved in Black German community organizations. And I would say I accessed an understanding of Blackness in a different way than I had a chance to in London. In London, I was not as politically aware as I became when I lived in Berlin. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So we have time for one last question. So this is from, I'm so sorry if I mispronounce your name, I'm so sorry. Heike Becker. So Heike writes, tremendous talk. I'm really interested to hear more about creative writing, the literary imagination, how creative writing can express lived experience in ways academic or even non-fiction writing can do. So how can,
what can creative writing do that academic writing can't do? Yeah.
And non-fiction as well.
And non-fiction, yeah. So this is not a researched answer. I would say I experience a kind of freedom with creative writing that I don't have when I write an academic text or a journalist text or such. Those texts the academic and the journalistic texts tend to be stringently argued. I take a point A, I have a couple of examples at point B and point C and point D that support the thing I was saying at point A, and then I arrive at a conclusion that neatly ties everything in together. There is an argument, there are reasons why we need academic writing, there are reasons why we need that kind of non-fiction journalistic writing. This is not an argument against those. What I find liberating about creative writing is I can get rid of that very stringent timeline, because I find real life isn't like that. Real life is full of contradictions, ambivalence, you know, or you might feel good about one thing but feel guilty about it at the same time. And creative writing and poetry and novels and novellas and such, they give you an opportunity to try to get behind all of those and bring all of those out. So what I have to talk about Beloved again, because it's actually my all-time favorite ever novel. Not that I've read so many, but this one stuck out in my mind. What Toni Morrison does with that is she gives us this huge moral conundrum. She says that here's a mother who kills her child. And I remember when I first thought about that, I thought, how did she even think of writing a story like that? And then I learned that she took that story actually from a real life event. You've heard of this?
Yes.
And that was even more fascinating. And apparently the mother who killed her baby was taken to court, and they couldn't work out whether to charge her with murder or destruction of property.
Yes.
How fascinating was that? And so, and I think that was the perfect way to deal with this huge traumatic event, which is of course not only traumatic for African-American writers, readers who are reading this and connecting it with their own family histories, but also for white US Americans, thinking this is the fruits, you know, this is our heritage, this is what we, this is what our forefathers did, and how are we dealing with this heritage? What responsibility are we taking? And it is possible to do that in an academic way, but I think, or it's necessary to use academic writing to look at it. But the power of Toni Morrison's work is that she goes straight to the heart. It's pretty hard to read this book and not be completely devastated by it, and that's why, yeah, I use creative writing for my particular form of activism.
Oh, thank you so much, Sharon.
So
my last comment was going to be if you could tell us more about your book, Ada's Room, which is being published next year, when it will be published. And then I saw that there was actually a question by Nyasha Mbewe, who is asking, will it be ready for her dissertation in June?
June next year. If it's a German language speaking person, then yes, you're safe. I have a mock-up of the book here. This is what it looks like. I'm totally excited. So this is not the real book, though. This is just for advertising purposes. The book will be published in February 2021. The official launch date is the 24th of February. And it's been published in German, and I don't know when the English translation will appear, I have to say. I'm not going to, I refuse to translate it myself. I'm not good at that. So I'm not sure when the translation will be ready.
Okay, and if people want to follow you, how do they go about doing
Follow
that?
me. So I always use my full name, Sharon Dodua Otoo, all written together. On Twitter, I'm at Sharon Dodua Otoo. On Instagram, I'm at Sharon Dodua Otoo. And on Facebook, you can find my author page. That's Sharon Dodua Otoo.
Amazing. Oh, Sharon, thank you so much.
So welcome. I've had a great time.
And Ali, thank you. I think in sign to clap, we do this. So thank you so much, Ali. Thank you so much to our audiences, to our attendees. Thank you so much for being attentive and for all your wonderful questions. Sorry we weren't able to get through all of them. And finally, to the Goethe Institute, I'll hand it over to Katharina to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was amazing. It was really thought-inspiring and touching, your lecture. Thank you so much. And also the discussion afterwards with Marcel and with the audience was amazing. Thank you. And normally now I would invite you all and all the guests to come and join us for drinks and snacks in our lovely library. But unfortunately it's not possible. So, and also the dinner will not be possible this time. It's really, really sad. But I do think that we can have this maybe next year or maybe soon, as long as once you have the translation, or we have the translation of your new novel, and then we really hope that we have you back here in London or in real. So yeah, let's wait for the next year to come. May I just announce another event we have on Zoom, actually, also. It's called Tell Me About Europe, and it will be on the 2nd of December at 6 p.m. in GMT. It's about Europe and about the idea what is happening after the UK leaves this EU community, and I think it will be also very interesting. So please mark it in your diary. And last but not least, I would like to thank my colleagues, Katrin, Francis, Ibrahim, and Gosha, who were behind the scenes and organizing everything and making sure that the technical things are all correct. So thank you so much. And of course, thank you all, dear guests who participated this evening and joining us. I'm really very touched to have this conversation and this lecture here. So again, thank you, Sharon, Marcel, Ali, and all of you in the sphere. Keep safe and see you next time. Bye-bye.